Okay, so chapter 12 begins by stating North Americans too often assume that people elsewhere hold comparable values or would, at least if they were given the opportunity. This chapter really explores the fact that that standards for ethical communication aren't widely shared and throughout the world. And Dr. Combs really discussed this topic and gave some really great insight. He discussed that there aren't any universal or transcultural principles that we all share. Um, Throughout his lecture, he really compared a lot of the Western approach to Taoism and how the Western rhetoric or the Western approach really goes with persuasion being paramount and winning being everything, and us not being afraid to alter the world or alter or change anything to become number one, and living in a kind of like fast-paced life and stress, like a lot of pressure on different aspects that are going to make us feel as though we're socially above. Whereas, Taoism depends upon central values such as interdependence, balance, harmony, the natural way. It's almost like more of an effortlessness, like there's an effortlessness about it, effortless way of living. Kind of like he explained, I remember about the wave and how it's just everything flows, everything works off of one another, and to a certain extent things will have to be altered, but for the most part things are supposed to be left the way they are, and they'll work in their natural way, and everything will be balanced. It really upheld an importance with balance and harmony. Uh, so, um, in his lecture, uh, I felt like it really created an insight on the fact that it's different, that ethics are different everywhere, and it's really going to depend upon a lot upon culture, and it's going to vary because of culture. Something that may be considered appropriate and ethical in one country may not be acceptable in another. For example, I know that in his lecture he talked about the Cambodian American high school students, that they were showing obedience with their background by putting their head down as they were being scorned by the judge or being questioned by the judge. They had their head down. They were submissive, and they felt as though that was the ethical approach and that was the appropriate manner in the court, whereas the judge wanted the students to look at him or her like in the eye and gave them a harsher punishment because they didn't follow those rules. They didn't follow um, that ethical uh, that ethical background that the judge had been brought up in, and there was obviously a gap and a disconnect in the courtroom whenever it came to that example, and I feel like that's because of like we discussed how it was cultural differences in ethics and how that can really affect it, and his lecture really pertained to this, and even more specifically intellectual property. We talked about Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, "I Have a Dream," and how he stated quotes from religious, philosophical, and literal resources without citing them or referring to them. And we talked about how he, his background, especially with the church and with the Black community, he felt like words cannot be owned, and borrowing others' ideas isn't wrong because it helped persuasion, it helped the social movement, it helped create a communion, whereas other people challenged him for plagiarism, and some of the white community felt as though it was wrong due to their history and how they were brought up and how they thought. So that definitely raises a question that's even bigger. Can words be property? Can you use other people's ideas in an ethical manner? And even going down further, do we really need a new digital media ethic? Because I do feel as though increased vulnerability does mean increased responsibility as users and as trustworthy human beings. Like, there's more information that's accessible through all different mediums as the world is adapting to this fast-paced lifestyle. And so the same question is formed and raised: can the property be is this property being stolen? Like, in this case, the question digitally is, if it isn't tangible, if it isn't tangible, can it be stolen? And I feel as though, you know, as human beings, we're obviously going to mess up. We're going to do unethical things, and we know that it's wrong whenever we illegally download music. I know that during class we all were kind of like, yeah, I've done it before. And it's still, I mean, it's still wrong. Like, we know what we're doing, and I know that we really discussed Taylor Swift and her taking off her music from Spotify, and that being because, she felt as though art should be it should be shared through, the art of music should be shared through artists and listeners, and that it is essentially being shared through consumption. And to a certain extent, I do believe that this is true. Like, I agree with this. I'm not saying that Taylor Swift couldn't afford to lose a few bucks. Like, that's not what I'm saying. But as in generally, I think that if we're gonna make everything, if we steal and we're starting to make things easily accessible, it's going to essentially decrease the value over time. And um, you know, as trustworthy humans, we have to respect intellectual property. Just because it isn't tangible, um, such as music on the internet, it doesn't mean that it can't be stolen. It doesn't mean that, I think that we do have that responsibility of um, taking certain precautions whenever we um, act in these ways and download um, music. And I mean, this could be streaming live videos, this could be streaming um, television shows, like, I don't know, movies. There are all different types of things, and I feel as though, because it's so easily accessible, I think that we as humans should um, take those precautions. And I know on page 13 it says, strictly speaking, we usually do not have a contract with people not to lie. It is just implied or assumed that we will not lie. Trust is some degree of truthfulness. But can we be trusted? And I do feel like, to a certain extent we can be, but there's always going to be those people that are going to take loopholes. There's always going to be those people that want it for cheaper. And I feel like to a certain degree we owe that to one another, to be more truthful and to be more ethical. So, and morally speaking, I'm not saying I've never done it, but I do think that, like, illegally downloading and doing things on, social, through those media outlets, I feel like we have that responsibility of doing those things in an appropriate manner. So I think that's about it.